Bonjour, vous êtes bien chez le service clientèle. Si vous avez un téléphone à touche, appuyez sur le bouton étoile maintenant. Sinon, attendez et une opératrice va vous répondre. Hello, you've reached the Customer Relations Department. If you have a touch-button phone, please push the star button now. If not...
If they want to survive, European businesses now have no choice but to make themselves easier to communicate with. That was exactly the problem at a large company here in Paris that lost a massive contract with an American firm. Desperate for help, the French company brought in a business consultant from England. He wants his name and that of the company to remain anonymous.
The purpose of these forums was to identify the people within the company who could change, would change, and wanted to change. Unfortunately, it was also to identify the people who couldn't change or wouldn't change. The result of these fora over the last few months have been that some people will be leaving the company, and at a very surprisingly young age. Some people will be taking early retirement, some people will be moved to one side. There's one thing for certain, there will be a lot of new employees at this company within 6 months.
What's he doing in the basket? Well, not much.
Adult French students try to understand British TV comedy here at the Paris Language School Executive Language Services. But it's no laughing matter. They're struggling to find top business jobs. And many are sceptical about the increasing demands in job adverts for perfect English speakers.
If he really needs this good level in English, of course, it might be fair. But usually, he doesn't need it.
It should be much easier to have specific English courses suggested by the company if you had to improve your English very quickly in a short time.
I am an executive and secretary, and today I'm searching a job. I have a fluent English, but not so good English, and it's very, very difficult to find an interesting place without being perfectly bilingual.
I don't think it's fair to have to learn English if you don't have to use it. It's okay. You don't have to disturb the person with that.
Whether it's really needed or not, the pressure is on the French workforce to improve their English. Dorothy Poley is director and founder of the school.
Well, let's say there's a pressure cooker going on for many reasons. First of all, there are so many mergers that whenever there's a merger, there are going to be people who leave. So you might as well find a reason for them to leave. So those who are not as adapted to the future will leave. So it's not only the pressure of learning English, it's the pressure of having fewer salaried people. Because the idea of the merger is to be more profitable. And the way to be more profitable is to get rid of your employees, excuse me for saying that. And so, of course, the ones who speak English are the ones who have a better chance for staying.
The real test for France now is to find ways to make sure the next generation of young people grow up with good levels of English. With the French schooling system often criticised for not focusing enough on spoken English, several independent associations have been formed to encourage exchanges of French children to England. Dominique Blay is president of one of them called ALEF.
French government tries to do a lot of things, but most of the time it turns out to be failures. That's why we try to do something. There is a real gap, because most French children learn English for years at school. When you consider that most pupils study it between college and lycée for about 7 years, and they are not even able to speak the language, it's really a shame.
And it's clear the exchanges have paid off. Delphine is one teenager who took part. She says learning English in school is definitely not enough.
I think they're doing a really good job for the written English, but for the oral English, I think it's very hard. And people who haven't had the chance to go to England or to do exchanges or anything like that, they have less chances to speak a good English because they don't hear English, and so I think it's harder.
And for one of the French parents who encouraged his child to do the exchange, he has personal experience of why it's so important.
I work in a very big international company which has increased its export work in the past 10 years from 10% to 70%. I'm one of the last generation coming to the end of their careers who didn't have any need to speak another language. Today, 70–80% of the company must speak English, as well as Spanish, German. It's now very important.
L'anglais, l'espagnol, l'allemand, toutes les langues. Donc je crois pour moi que c'est essentiel.
Bonjour et bienvenue dans ce journal de 13h.
Bonjour et merci de vous joindre à nous. Voici le sommaire de cette
The 1 o'clock news on the national TV station France 2. The male presenter is Rashid Ahab, whose parents are both Algerian. But his presence on the screen is not enough for Luc Saint-Éloi from the Equality Collective.
Nous demandons simplement qu'à partir de certains stades où...
With the arrival of the new millennium, we're demanding change. We want our children to identify with the people they see on TV. We contribute to the richness of this country and we pay TV license fees, so it's normal that we're fed up with being rejected and marginalized. We want to be fully functional members of this society.
With an estimated 11 million black people living in France, campaigners have succeeded in convincing the government's broadcasting regulator, the CSA, to look into the matter. Some TV stations also now appear to be willing to find solutions. The deputy head of news at France 2, Bruno Elba, admits black and ethnic minority groups are not represented, but he says there is definitely no policy to exclude them.
We do not think about that problem on a regular basis, and we are wrong. But you know, days only have 24 hours, and we are already very busy. But as a citizen, I think that we should address this on a regular basis. With this campaign, I think this is a good incentive to think about it more regularly.
Bruno Elba says the problem is more to do with what he calls cultural and economic inequality and access to education. The debate has already turned sour for France's top-rating station, the private channel TF1. Campaigners are calling for a boycott of the station, claiming it refuses to address the issue. TF1 wouldn't be interviewed, but it did release a statement.
Of course, this is a legitimate subject and we are dealing with it. But we will not discuss this in the public domain while there is a threat of a boycott. We object to the aggressive approach taken by the campaigners.
Journalism and media schools are also under fire for not doing more to recruit ethnic minority students. I spoke to some of the students at one of the schools in Paris.
The truth is that we don't hear them, we don't listen to them as much as we must do. So we have to accept this culture, which is really different from ours. In fact, that's true.
I think it's a good idea to have more black faces on the French television, but yet I don't know how the public opinion will react to this, because they are not used to seeing black faces on television. French people like to feel familiar with the presenter.
On va pincer les fesses des Marseillais avec ça.
Oh là là. Bon,
alors, donc, waouh. Vous avez fait Rambo comme ça, chef?
If the Equality Collective had its way, all French TV programmes, including game and chat shows, would be subject to a quota system. It says if change is not happening naturally and political integration policies are failing, then affirmative action is needed. However, Bruno Elba from France 2 says he'll fight any attempts to enforce a quota.
I think a quota system does not respect something that is very essential to us, which means the professional ability of the people. The problem is to be addressed from the very beginning of the scholarity of these young people, and that our government and every citizen should help them have access to a better scholarity, to become students that can compare their efficiency with other students. And I think that a quota system is not the good way to help these people take their place in the society.
A classic French restaurant just off the Champs-Élysées here in Paris. Stella Maris has served up the finest in French cuisine for years. But to the surprise of many vegetarians, it's now offering a strictly meat-free menu. Well, it's supposed to be strictly vegetarian. The French food and wine writer Jean-Paul Genet went along to try it out.
What happened was, in fact, typical of what could happen to a vegetarian in a French restaurant, because it's always difficult for French chefs as for French people going to restaurants to understand really what it means vegetarian. For instance, we got, for a starter, a mousse of carrots, and after that, the chef was very proud to offer us a kind of cabbage pâté with some black truffles. But when we tasted the first spoon, there was some foie gras inside. So just a little bit, he told us, but he has not understood, and also the waiters has not understood so quickly that vegetarian is pure vegetarian, and foie gras was the worst thing.
The risk of a surprise like that means that many French vegetarians still choose to eat at one of the handful of vegetarian restaurants in Paris. Lubos is the chef here at the vegetarian restaurant La Victoire Suprême du Cœur. Vegetarian restaurants are often criticized for producing dishes that are bland or tasteless. Lubos, who's originally from the Czech Republic, strongly defends his cooking.
I mean, we use the spices, we use the, the attractive technologies to make the food. So we use, for example, beans, and we use the, all these kind of things, and they have very good taste, and the mushrooms, and also they can, with spices, with combination with spices, it can taste very, very good, and I think it's, it can surpass the meat.
Another worker here is Bakul, who says the restaurant's ambiance makes it stand out in Paris.
Comparing it to other restaurants around, it's obviously very different. I mean, the colours, just to look at the colours in this restaurant, they're bright. Look at the colours generally in other restaurants, and they're not so bright. There's no smoking, which actually is quite a extraordinary thing for most people.
While some traditional French restaurants are now trying to offer meat-free menus, vegetarians say there still seems to be a long way to go in changing attitudes.
I think when you come in a restaurant, you say, I am vegetarian, you say, oh my God, it's like someone who comes from another planet, and they have to adapt their food, and no one is really used, even the cookers, they don't know what to do for vegetarian, and they propose you ham, and sometimes even chicken, and some fish, and they say, no, this is not meat. So I think when you say you're vegetarian, it's like you live around, not in the society, but around society.
Sometimes still, people think perhaps you are sick, or perhaps you have to take care of your fitness, or if you want to follow some strict rules. I don't know, but it's more and more easy to be accepted, and also since the mad cow things in England, so many people have been conscious of the fact that we can live without eating meat.
The food and wine writer Jean-Paul Genet says to eat meat is still very much an integral part of French life, and even a status symbol. He recalls the controversy a few years ago surrounding the case of a French woman who was jailed for stealing meat to give to her children.
And it was immediate scandal in France, because this woman was telling, okay, I have no money to give meat to my children, so I had to steal. But this case shows how it has a social importance to give meat to his children. It is not at all a matter of health, or that the children could have died from hunger, but eating meat gives you a minimum status.
With an increasing number of new vegetarian restaurants opening in Paris over the past few years, and plans for a further 2 in the capital this year, vegetarian groups say life appears to be becoming easier. Bakul from the vegetarian restaurant is also confident about the future.
it's so big now in England and America and even other restaurants, even other countries in Europe. So eventually it's going to have an effect on France. And although France seems to be slightly behind the times, I think they will slowly catch on and grow into the whole vegetarian culture.
When you're walking here through the streets of Paris, it's very hard not to look up at the beautiful buildings and sights. But like other big cities in France, it's crucial to keep your eyes on the pavement if you want to stay clean and smelling nice.
I don't know, but it is better to educate people and tell them to take care about their dogs, their animals, and themselves.
Well, I think it's very dirty because there's a lot of dog mess in Paris and people do absolutely nothing. But some streets are very disgusting.
You're walking along and you're wanting to look at the sights and look up at the buildings and all the beautiful architecture, and you find you can't really do that because you've got to look down on the footpaths and make sure you're avoiding the either complete or squashed out bits that are on the footpath, unfortunately. Yeah, so it's not too fun.
It's comments like this which have forced council officials to take more action against dog pollution. René Rouaz is a manager at the Paris City Council Environment Protection Department.
Il faut savoir qu'à Paris, 200 000 propriétaires de chiens utilisent bien sûr la voie publique.
You must remember that in Paris there are about 200,000 dog owners who walk their animals in the street. We have systems in place to clean up dog mess, including 4,500 street cleaners and the 70 special motorbike which clean away the mess. But all of this will be in vain if we don't educate dog owners on a regular basis.
Quotidiennement ou périodiquement à l'intention justement des maîtres et des chiens.
So, as the special poop-scooping motorbikes roar into action, the council does acknowledge that changing attitudes is just as important. Marie-Claire Manache is in charge of getting the council's message across.
La mairie de Paris mène des opérations de communication.
The council has a regular education program for dog owners. This includes publicity on street, billboards and in the newspapers. But we also try to talk to dog owners directly on the streets. We hand out pamphlets explaining how we're trying to get them to respect other people's rights to have clean sidewalks.
Afin de les aider à respecter le trottoir.
Here in France, it's illegal for dog owners not to clean up their pets' mess, and fines have been increased to try to deter people. But getting cooperation from dog owners is difficult. One of them who I approached had this to say.
Elle fait ce qu'elle veut. Il y a des trottoirs, c'est fait pour ça. C'est tout.
In other words, my dog can do what she likes. The pavement is there, why not use it? I also asked him if he cared that people might walk in his dog's mess.
Si jamais posé la question, elle fait ce qu'elle veut, c'est tout. Ils ont des yeux, elle regarde où ils marchent.
He said, I never ask myself this. People have eyes, they should use them. But not all dog owners are the same.
Sidewalks must be kept clean. If we have a dog, it's our responsibility. You have to clean up the dog mess.
And it seems the public are confronting dog owners more often when mess is left in the streets. Marcus, a Canadian who's lived here for 2 years, is one of those trying to change old habits.
Just a few days ago, I was in the street and a shop owner had just opened his shop, and a dog owner had his dog do his business right in front of the shop. I was just walking along, and I could have walked right in it, and both the shop owner and I started on him, and after our persistent efforts, he finally gave in, and the shop owner got him something to pick it up with, and was taken care of. Maybe attitudes can change. I mean, certainly would be nice to think so.
Council officials say while it's hard to change old habits, they're confident Paris can overcome the dog mess problem.
Nous faisons des progrès chaque année, sinon chaque jour, mais pour l'instant la lutte n'est pas encore.
We are making progress, but at the moment, no. We have not yet won the battle. We must continue to try to change the behavior of dog owners on a regular basis. But there's no doubt it's a long, drawn-out task.
À chaque fois, mais c'est une tâche de longue haleine.
I spent all my life in a wheelchair, but I love life and I love to go out, and nothing will stop me.
Victoria is one of the hundreds of disabled French people trying to get around a city which is still not wheelchair friendly. Even small efforts to improve accessibility can alter life dramatically for disabled people.
Today I've decided to go to a cafe. I've chosen this one because a sticker shows me that disabled people are welcome here. And another thing is very important. Here I can go to the toilet because this chain decided to build a lift for helping us to go down to the toilets. And that's very important and rare because other cafes have stairs and stairs up or down.
After visiting dozens of cafes and restaurants, we could only find one owner willing to talk to us about why his cafe hadn't made any changes.
There is no problem with disabled people. We can help them come inside if they want. Our staff can lift the wheelchair or make some room somewhere. It's too much money to make special thing for them. They only come 1 or 2 times every year.
When we asked how a disabled person could get down the long winding stairs to the toilet, there was only a shrug of the shoulders. A hotel can also be a problem. That was our next port of call.
When I travel, I like to stay in the hotels. Some of them presents a lot of problem for me because for a wheelchair, a swinging door is an obstacle. Stairs is an obstacle. Now I'm in Paris, in a 4-star hotel. When you come into the hotel, you have automatic doors, big reception, big lifts, everything's okay. But when you come into the bedroom, you see a lot of furniture, small doors for the bathroom, and you can't use it. I spoke to one of the managers, and she's very interested by my remarks.
Although the manager refused to be interviewed, she did take down Victoria's number, saying she wanted more advice about making some changes at the hotel. The Ministry of Solidarity admits there are problems trying to get companies to follow the exact requirements of the law. Spokesman Philippe Saint-Martin says modifications in new buildings can often end up being useless.
Il y a donc un gros travail à faire au niveau.
We have a big job trying to get the message through to architects and builders. Sometimes there is difference between what the law says and what is actually constructed. They have to remember they can be taken to court if the law is not followed.
To get around in Paris, I have an assistant with a car for helping me. The metro and bus is very difficult to use, even the few lines which were adapted, still very difficult to use. One thing worth noting, that in Paris parking is free, because it's cheaper than to make special places for disabled people.
It's not uncommon in Paris and other big French cities to hear stories about bus drivers on specially modified buses being reluctant to help disabled people get on board, or to hear of passengers complaining about being held up.
The most important thing I want to say is that all the problems we talked about will be solved when the attitudes towards disabled people will change.
If you want to talk rollerblading, there's one obvious place to come, and that's here at Place d'Italie in southeast Paris. Every Friday night, hundreds of rollerbladers gather here to take part in a big mass rollerblading marathon. Accompanied by the police, who also wear skates, they whiz around the streets of the capital. Well, I'm here with one of the organisers from Paris Roller, and his name's Jan Souchon. Jan, can you tell me, what are your ideas or thoughts about the plans to regulate rollerbladers in Paris?
Yes, I think it would be better to go on the street like cycles, but perhaps it is dangerous too for people who are beginner and who don't know ride well.
So there should be the chance to ride on the pavement if somebody wants to?
Yes, I think so, yes. It would be better.
Tell me about the problems from the other side, like for motorists having to avoid rollerbladers.
I think at the moment they are quite surprised by rollers. They don't know how they ride. They can turn very quickly, and they are surprised. And that's why they fear rollers too.
Well, before all the rollerbladers set off for their jaunt around Paris, time to get some opinions from some of those taking part.
Just rollerbladers are just going from the footpaths to the road and anywhere, because it's just for us to getting free anywhere in the city, because there's so much traffic anywhere. So for us, it's just the best way to cycle anywhere. So we just go from the footpath to the road. I think there can be any regulation, but no one is going to follow the regulation.
You need to go somewhere. You must to be free, because this one is the freedom. You know, it's not the car. You go. We can go anywhere, everywhere, and this one is good like this. But careful, because there is lot of crash, lot of. It's very difficult, you know. You must to look everywhere.
I mean, if you want to regulate rollerblades like bikes, I mean, even bikes are. I mean, there is a regulation, but there is nothing is followed by people. So I think it's more education that you have to give to people than really regulation. And this is. I mean, I don't know yet, I mean, how to do it exactly, but I think it's mainly education that you have to give to people.
What sort of education?
And mainly, I mean, French people, when you give laws, they like to bypass laws. So, I mean, if you put regulations, they just bypass it just because it's a law. So.
How would you educate somebody about rollerblading? What do they need to know?
Well, maybe by organizing this kind of events, like Friday night in Paris, or even Sunday you have it at Bastille. But I mean, when you're rollerblading alone in the street, I mean, you don't have police and everything around you, so you have to, I mean, to be educated, I mean, maybe by more information on TV, or for especially, I think mainly it's young people that do rollerblades, or maybe in magazine or something like this.
The police sirens mark the start of the rollerblading marathon. I think I'll stay on the sidelines though. I'm clumsy on my feet as it is, let alone with wheels underneath. Full weekend at Place d'Italie in Paris, I'm Seamus Kearney.
Well, we'll have to move on there to our last subject this weekend, which is brutality within the police force, because the police in France are under the spotlight after the jailing of 5 officers for what the European Court of Human Rights described as savage beatings and sexual abuse of 2 suspected drug dealers. So how bad is the problem, and are things, as the police themselves claim, getting better? This report from RFI's Seamus Kearney begins with an immigrant living in Paris.
When I first landed here in France, coming from United States, what I noticed first, this town of Paris was like a town that was in civil war. It was very strange to me to see all these policemen in the street, you know, like they were waiting for something. They were waiting for some troubles, and there wasn't troubles at all.
First impressions of an immigrant to France in 1993. Mokhtar, which is not his real name, is now working for the Association of Undocumented People, otherwise referred to as sans-papiers. He helps those who claim they've been the victim of heavy-handed police. These allegations are not uncommon in France. The Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture highlighted serious concerns in a report last year. It said medical records backed up stories of suspects being slapped, punched, kicked, beaten with truncheons and left handcuffed for hours on end. Jean-Luc is a man in his 40s who claims he was beaten up by the police when he was younger.
When I was younger, I was beaten by police, yes. In the past, I think that a lot of policemen were drunk. I think now it's better, yes. And they have all changed, because a lot of them have been attacked by police when they're young, and they're trying to change.
However, the latest court case in which 5 officers were jailed has dealt a blow to the image of the police. And the police unions have distanced themselves from officers who this month publicly demonstrated against the verdict. Pierre Marcos from France's National Union of Police Officers says despite the recent case, he believes the right steps are being taken to improve the force.
I believe that the police are undergoing a great evolution since political will is getting us to where we have always asked to go. That is, to have community-based police officers who work more closely with the public. We do not want the police to move away from the population, and we do not want to see the police having only a repressive role.
It's clear, though, the police have a long way to go to clean up their image in the eyes of the public.
The image is very different in difficult suburbs, and where especially the youth is very much anti-police, and probably the police doesn't behave as well also in those parts.
I think that the policemen are not all violent. Some are, but not all of them. And I think that we have to trust them because we have no choice.
Social action groups in France have been lobbying the government to introduce more police training. Mokhtar from the Association of Undocumented People says a change in attitude is crucial.
They have to try to understand people. I think they have to do some psychology to help people that are generally the delinquents. They are in despair. I think there is so many things to do which is not violent.
Mokhtar of the Sans-Papiers de France, ending that report from RFI's Seamus Kearney in Paris. Alice Sedar, the French police unions, as we heard there, have reacted to this by claiming the 5 officers sent to prison have been treated unfairly.